You know, it's pretty incredible when you think about it, how history can turn on the smallest of things. A word, a single spark, or, in this case, just a simple handful of salt. Today, we're going to dive into the story of how a protest over something you find in every kitchen literally shook the foundations of the British Empire.
I mean, how can a pinch of salt actually threaten an entire empire? It sounds crazy, right? But that's the central question we're going to tackle. How did this everyday mineral become such a powerful weapon for a revolution? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to go back and understand the world where all this went down.
So let's set the scene. We're going back to the 1930s, to an India that's under the very firm control of the British Raj. And the whole stage for this incredible story was set by one single, deeply, deeply unfair law.
Okay, so at the very heart of this whole conflict was something called the SALT Act of 1882. What was it? Well, in simple terms, it gave the British government a complete monopoly, total control over every single grain of salt in India. But you know, what did that actually mean for the average person living there?
Well, the cruelty of this law was all in how it was designed. Just try to imagine this. You live in a coastal country, but you're forbidden, legally forbidden, from just walking down to the beach and collecting the natural salt that's right there. And then, to add insult to injury, you're forced to buy that exact same salt back from your rulers, but now it's got this massive, heavy tax slapped on it. For the poorest families, this wasn't just some small annoyance. No way. It was an absolutely crushing financial burden.
So into this really tense situation steps one of history's most famous figures, Mahatma Gandhi. And he knew that to really challenge the British, he needed something that would unite all Indians. And, well, he came up with a plan that was nothing short of audacious.
You see, Gandhi's genius here was in choosing salt. You might be asking, why salt? Well, think about it. Everybody needed it. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, what your religion was, where you lived, salt cut across all those lines. So by targeting the salt tax, he wasn't just protesting some random law. He was hitting at a symbol of British oppression that every single Indian felt, personally. It was brilliant.
And his weapon of choice? It wasn't going to be violence. Instead, he chose satyagraha, which basically means truth force. It's this powerful idea of nonviolent civil disobedience. And then, in a move that was just unbelievably bold, he writes a letter to the British Viceroy, a guy named Lord Irwin, and tells him exactly what he's planning to do. The British, they pretty much just laughed it off. That, my friends, was a big mistake.
So the plan is set, the letter's been sent, and the world was about to witness one of the most incredible protests in all of history. A long, grueling walk to the sea. It all kicked off on March 12, 1930. And you know what? It started really small. I mean, just 78 of Gandhi's most trusted volunteers setting out from his ashram. That's it. Just 78 people for what was, let's be honest, a monumental task. And let's just take a second to appreciate the sheer scale of this journey. We're talking a 24-day trek. 24 days, all on foot, covering 240 miles to reach this tiny coastal village called Dandi. I mean, that is just an incredible feat of endurance and pure commitment. But that little group of 78, it didn't stay small for long. Not at all. As they walked from village to village, Gandhi would stop and speak to the crowds, breaking down just how unjust this SALT Act was. And guess what? People listened. They started joining in. That group of 78 swelled into thousands. And pretty soon, journalists from all over the world were showing up to cover this story. This little protest was fast becoming a global event.
All right, so after 24 long days on the road, the marchers finally reached their destination. They're at the sea. And you can just imagine, the air was absolutely electric. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. So on April 5th, they arrive, and they're met by these huge crowds. They spend the whole night in prayer, just this feeling of anticipation, building and building. Then, at sunrise on April 6th, Gandhi wades into the Arabian Sea for a symbolic bath. And then came the moment the whole world was waiting for. He walks over to the shore, to a spot where the sea had left behind these deposits of natural salt, and he bends down. He picks up a small lump of salty mud, openly, defiantly breaking the law, and then he says, "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." Wow, an act so simple, right, but so incredibly profound. He had justified one of the most powerful empires on Earth with a literal handful of salt.
And that one simple act, It was like a spark that lit a wildfire across the entire nation. The defiance didn't end there on the beach of Dundee. Oh no, it had just begun.
The impact was, immediate. Inspired by what Gandhi did, millions of Indians all over the country just started making and selling their own salt, completely defying the law. Of course, the British Empire's response was swift and it was harsh. Mass arrests started happening everywhere, but the movement just kept going. And one of the most famous follow-up protests was at a place called the Dharasana Salt Works.
And if you want to understand the sheer scale of the crackdown, just look at this number. Over 60,000 people. That includes Gandhi himself, all of them arrested and thrown in jail for the crime of making salt. But here's the thing. You can jail the protesters, but you can't jail the idea.
Even with Gandhi locked away in prison, the movement's spirit was just unbreakable. At those Dharasana salt works I mentioned, protesters were led by the incredible poet and activist Sarojini Naidu. They marched peacefully, totally nonviolently, towards the salt pans, and they were met with just brutal violence from the police. The news reports of this, they horrified the world. It really exposed the ugly, brutal side of British rule for everyone to see.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, the psychological shift was just immense. It's like a before and after picture. Before the march, there was this widespread feeling of fear, of helplessness against the British. But after, the Indian people felt empowered. They had a new sense of their own power. This whole protest proved that nonviolence could be an incredibly effective weapon. It turned the distant dream of independence into something that felt real, something truly possible. And that kind of brings us to a final thought here. The legacy of the Salt March is still so powerful today. It's this incredible reminder that sometimes the best way to challenge an overwhelming power isn't with force, but with a simple, symbolic act that absolutely everyone can understand. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the handfuls of salt in our world today?